Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the JCC of Metro Detroit's 70th Annual Jewish Book Fair. My name is Linda Zlatoff, and I'm a member of the Jewish Book Fair Committee, and I'm happy to be with all of you. It is my pleasure to welcome you on this Friday morning to Beautiful Country, a memoir by Qian Wang. This is the 70th annual of the Detroit Jewish Book Fair, and we're celebrating with an entire year of book and story programming. Join us as we honor the world's first Jewish book fair, highlighting diverse authors, curating new Jewish writing, and promoting the global art of storytelling. Our festival week, which continues through this weekend, is just the beginning. To be sure to come back for exceptional opportunities throughout the year to engage with the best of Jewish books and authors. To see our full event schedule, watch events you may have missed, and find our online store where you will find Beautiful Country, a memoir, and other many hand-selected books and gifts, visit our website, culturalarts.jcc.det, bookfair, / Sorry, I may have misstated that, but it'll appear on your screen. If you enjoy this event and other book fair events, please consider becoming a patron or donating to the book fair. You can do so to either at our website, and again, culturalarts.jccdet.org / book fair. We rely on our community support to make this annual event possible. So thank you in advance for becoming part of our family. The book fair team would also very much like to thank our day sponsors, the Atara Zimmerman Philanthropic Fund. I also want to extend our deepest gratitude to the whole Book Fair Committee. Your dedication, innovation, commitment, and hard work have made all of this possible. We have a very stirring event for you this morning, and we want you to be part of it. You can ask questions, offer comments in the YouTube comment section below, or by texting the number on the corner of your screen. Our speakers have a great discussion prepared, and they will take as many of your questions as they can. While you're here at our YouTube channel, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and click the reminder bell. That way you'll never miss any of our exciting events. Focus of today's program is Beautiful Country, a memoir. We have with us the author of this book, Qian Wang, as well as local immigration attorney, Ruby Robinson, who will moderate the discussion. Beautiful Country is a memoir of change, big dreams, and becoming of age in the shadows. In China, Qian parents were professors. In America, the family was illegal and required all the determination and small joys they could muster to survive. Inhabiting her childhood perspective with exquisite lyrical clarity and unforgettable charm and strength, Qian Wang has penned an essential American story about a family fracturing under the weight of invisibility and a girl who never stopped seeking the light. Qian Wang's writing has appeared in many major publications such as the New York Times and Washington Post, and she regularly speaks on issues such as immigration, education, discrimination, economic disparity. She's the founder and leader of the Jews of Color at Central Synagogue, where she's also a member of the Racial Justice Task Force and the Social Justice Reform Leadership. Moderator Ruby Robinson is managing attorney for the Michigan Immigration Rights Center. He's an active member of the board of the Isaac Agree Downtown Synagogue and in the Bagley Community Council Book Club. Please join me in welcoming Qian Wang and Ruby Robinson.
Great. Thank you so much, Linda, for that introduction. Qian, it's wonderful to be here with you this morning.
I'm so glad to be here. Thank you all for having me.
All right. So just a little bit of a background, and then we'll jump right into it. So Qian is an author, a litigator, an advocate, a role model, and overall an exemplar human. She was born in China at the age of 7 in the early 90s, traveled with her mom to join her dad, who has already been in the United States for 2 years. They lived together, undocumented, in Brooklyn for several years. This memoir, told from the perspective of Qinjulie as a child, traces that early life as an undocumented immigrant during those first 5 or 6 years in the United States, and how that undocumented status affected almost all aspects of the family's life and their daily decisions they made, both large and small, from how or if to seek medical care to the types of household furniture that was best to procure. With a combination of grit, determination, pain, hard work, and of course luck, Qinjulie excelled and was accepted at and graduated from Swarthmore College. She then graduated from Yale Law School in 2012. After law school, she clerked for Judge Morgan Christian on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit in Alaska, and also for Justice Peter Masson on the Alaska Supreme Court. She has litigated appellate and commercial matters for a number of years before opening a boutique firm focused on civil rights and the education context with her law and life partner. She lives in Brooklyn. And though I am an attorney, I will do my best not to be a legal fanboy or to use anything beyond plain language. And so before we talk about kind of the genesis of the book, I actually want to bring up a term that Linda used during her opening. Linda said that your family was illegal. And we didn't plan this, but behind my head, there is a little photo with a quote from Elie Wiesel that says, no human being is illegal. Human beings can be beautiful or more beautiful. They can be fat or skinny. They can be right or wrong, but illegal? How can a human being be illegal? From Elie Wiesel. Qinjulie, do you want to respond just to how you feel or why is the term illegal problematic when referring to a person?
I am aware of that quote, and I'm a huge fan of that. I also have had it in my office over the years, so I guess it was meant to be. Yeah, I think the use of the term illegal, it came a lot from political discourse and how statutes, illegal alien was for a while the formal term for undocumented immigrants. But how that word works in practicality is deeply insidious, because when a child in particular comes into a country and grows up with the idea that they are illegal, and that could be in many it could have been, during Holocaust or World War II Germany, where the fact of being Jewish was in some ways illegal. It could be that you grow up gay and you feel that is illegal. It's illegal for you to marry. It becomes embedded within you and your sense of self. And for me, it gave me this deep-rooted sense of shame that there was something inherently wrong with who I was, something inherently wrong with my family. And it took decades to excavate that and disown it rather than continue to internalize it. And I have to say that I, to this day, am still working on that excavation, the history and roots of my relationship with that term and all of the implications from that. My understanding of who I was runs really, really deep. And I think it can be very hurtful and problematic for individuals in the undocumented community to hear that word, and even others who are not undocumented, but as I said, identify with that word in some way or had that word affixed to them early in life.
Thank you so much for clarifying and providing a little more context for that. We'll try to use the term to the best of our ability, undocumented or without status, in referring to individuals throughout this talk. And so you mentioned that it certainly affected you over the course of your lifetime. Is that one of the reasons why you wrote this story, or wrote about your childhood? And can you talk about why did you write this? And then it's one thing to write, and then another thing to decide to share something with the world. What was that experience about, and what did you hope to accomplish by doing so? Any of those questions are fine.
Of course. There are two phases to my writing this book process. The first was very early in life. I arrived in New York City at age 7, as Ruby mentioned. And overnight, I realized that my extended family, my friends, everything that I had known all the sources of comfort and love that I had grown accustomed to were gone and on the opposite side of the globe. And I felt so lost and lonely. That loneliness really persisted until I discovered the public library and the specific branch where I found my first sense of home in America was the Chatham Square Library on East Broadway in Chinatown. Once I found the library and walked in and saw this whole world of books, picture books, chapter books, novels, I realized that here was another world of family and friends, and maybe I could find a refuge and a way to make a home there. Chief because at that time, my father had said the faster I learned English, the sooner I would be able to ward off suspicion about my recent immigration and how I came to be here. So that was part of it, but also I just loved all the characters I met in those books, Charlotte's Web and Very Hungry Caterpillar, Amelia Bedelia, and of course, Sweet Valley High and Babysitter's Club. But in all of those books, especially in the 90s, there were no characters and people like me. There were very few people of color. Babysitter's Club had a few, and even fewer immigrants, and no undocumented immigrants. And I remember turning to my mother and saying, "Are we the first people to have ever lived like this? That can't be, because I look around Chinatown and I see people who are living seemingly similar to us. What is going on? Why is there not a book here?" And my mom always gave me the sense that I could do whatever I put my mind to. And she said, "You can write that book. You can be that person and make sure that other people out there know that they are not alone in the way that you are feeling right now." And that always stayed with me. But then I got moving to the second phase of my book writing journey. I got distracted. I, very much as a trauma response, sought out high-paying careers to make sure that I would never have to worry about going hungry again, and kind of lost myself in that world for a while. But in May 2016, I became a naturalized citizen. It was 22 years after I first stepped foot here. And I walked into the Southern District of New York, which is a courthouse where I had argued before. And at the very front of the room was a video screen of President Barack Obama. And he opened his speech with, "Greetings, fellow Americans." At that point, something came unglued in me. It felt like I had stuffed something deep, deep down in my brain and my stomach, and it just emerged. And I started bawling, because at that point I realized for the first time how early I had become American, how quickly I fell in love with this country despite everything, and how badly I had wanted anyone to call me American, and how nobody would ascribe that term to me. And here was the President of the United States awarding me with the word American. So at the threshold of the door on my way out, I made a note to myself. I was worried that I was going to take being a citizen for granted. And I said, never forget this moment. Never forget the profound privilege you now have. And I never have. Every day I wake up and I think, I'm a citizen. I don't need to worry about deportation. But going into the November 2016 election and seeing how our political stage had morphed, I mean, immigration has always been a hot topic, and undocumented immigrants specifically have always served as scapegoats. But I don't think that was ever more true than in 2016. And once again, I remember that I had a profound privilege, power, and so responsibility to speak up, because millions of undocumented immigrants and documented immigrants have no idea when they might ever see the inside of that courtroom and be called American by the president. And I had that privilege and experience, and thus had become a choice to continue to stay silent rather than being forced to live in secrecy. And because many others did not have that choice, I thought that it was the least I could do to remove some of the stigma behind the many political talking points and headlines and show the real life beating heart behind all of the terms and terminologies that were thrown around on the debate stage. So that began my journey in writing this book. Of course, I quickly realized that I needed to go through a lot of therapy because I had not processed or understood or even spoken about everything that had happened. And it would be a long time from then when I felt ready to finally kind of pour my experiences out on the page. And even when I did so, as soon as I thought about someone reading it, I just clammed up. I couldn't write anymore. I would think, how can I do this to my parents? What if ICE comes after us? What if they're denaturalizing people now? What if we have to go through that? I just could not function. So I wrote the book on my phone on my subway commute, in part because I had no time and in part because it felt much more casual, like jotting down notes to myself. Never thinking that I would finish the book, never thinking that if I did finish the book, I would find the courage and foolishness to send it out in the world. And yet somehow, once I finished the book, I got it to an agent, and there have been many times in the publishing process where I've said, is it too late? Can I take it back now? But, it's out there now for good. So here we are.
All right. Well, that is, well, we appreciate your courage and, your perceived foolishness at the time. But, this is obviously the reality. And I think we've all certainly benefited as a result of that. And, having you talk about, the fear, the loneliness, the trauma, these are the things that I see every day working with my clients. And, my role as an attorney is not necessarily to tell their story. Like, they should be able to tell their own story. I, have the privilege of being able to use the law as a vehicle to tell their story, but it's only a small aspect of the story. And so I appreciate the additional context that you provide. Like my area of focus is limited to like what I can tell a judge or what I can tell an officer, right? But they're not going to know about, what happens day to day in terms of, accessing medical care or, whether or not to report something to the police or just kind of other daily aspects of living that, are kind of irrelevant to the decision maker. So, and I think one thing I really appreciated about the memoir was that you used your young self, young Qian as the narrator, and it's not told from the slightly more detached or analytical adult looking back. Can you talk about why did you choose to utilize the child as kind of the narrative viewpoint and not have the memoir be from your arrival in the United States until the present? Like, why is it focused on just those kind of the first crucible of living in Brooklyn undocumented?
My hypothesis going into this book was that there's something inherently universal about childhood. Despite the singularity or precision of the details that have happened to each of us, there's something relatable about being 3 feet tall and walking around in the world, not understanding what is going on and why the rules exist, and repeatedly being told by tall adults not to do things. That is something that we can all remember. And the things that happened to us during that time, while again different in specificity, I think affects us in our growth, in our fears, in our dreams and hopes in a similar way, in that childhood has such a hold on our adult selves, a very invisible hold, but a strong one. And because immigration in our country is so often politicized and cast in legal terms in a way that appeals to reason and the mind, I wanted to avoid that framing entirely and speak from the heart. And who best speaks from the heart? A child. A child will be honest. If a child is hurt, she will say that. If a child is happy, she will say that. You will know it. So pretty much from inception, I thought of this book as being told from my childhood perspective. in some ways too, I think it's helpful to see some of the experiences through childhood eyes. It brings a sense of levity to what is going on. And I really didn't want to say things like, looking back, this really shouldn't have happened to me, because that's not how I experienced it. I wanted readers to experience those years as I experienced them. And how do children experience things? When things happen, they roll with it. They're like, okay, this is my life now, and I have to do this and that, which is in many ways what immigrants have to learn to do at all ages. When you're brought into a new continent where you don't know anyone, you just have to roll with the punches. The 5 years that I focused on, I could never have thought of framing the book otherwise. I think there's a very natural story arc in the 5 years, and I came in with this very clear idea, and I reminded myself throughout, this is not a vanity project. It is not a autobiography of Qian Wang. No one would find me so interesting as to read about my entire life, because frankly, most of it is pretty boring. It's me sitting in front of a computer for 14 hours at a time. I wanted to shed light on the new immigrant experience, on what it is really like to be undocumented, what it's like to be a child figuring out her way in the world, and her identity. And so that capsule of 5 years allowed me the medium to do that. And I do believe in law, in literature, and in life, there's so much power in details. So I wanted to render the entire world and my experiences in that world in as much detail as I could honestly and truthfully remember and recall. And to do that for my entire life would not only be tedious, but it would have been a 10,000 page book, I guess. So the focus, I think, afforded me more creativity and more exploration of what I was really going through during those years.
Great. Thank you so much for doing so, and for providing some of those details. So I want to talk a little bit about that. So you have this quote that I love, that I keep returning back to. In the vacuum of anxiety that was undocumented life, fear was gaseous. It expanded to fill our entire world until it was all we could breathe. I love that sentence, like from a literary perspective, and I love it even more as an attorney who practices immigration law, because it is just brutally honest about, the day-to-day life that you are experiencing or had experienced, and that, really fear is that guiding principle for so many of the decisions that you and your family are making. Can you talk about or share, an experience for how, fear affected, the decisions that you made or that your family made, and maybe, like, does that still affect you in the same way, even though, you are a naturalized U.S. citizen?
Fear really crept up on me. When we landed at JFK, I noticed that my parents became different people. They were naturally joyful people who loved to play pranks and sing songs. And in New York, I noticed that they were constantly looking over their shoulders. It was as if they were waiting for someone to catch up to them, and I had no idea what that meant. But like all children, I picked up on the emotional energy of my parents until it became mine. So I was very quickly told to be very cautious, to trust nobody, and to turn and walk the other way if I saw someone in uniform. So it became this rule of my life, this term of engagement, that I was to escape notice and to run away and live in fear. And there are many ways that this manifested, but one way in which it happened, and with profound consequences, was that my mother fell ill, likely due from malnutrition and working too hard. She was very sick, had a bad stomach ache, what felt like a stomach ache, for a very long time before she even told me and my father. I, of course, watched my parents like a hawk, because again, when you're living in fear, you cling to those you can trust. And I knew that there was something wrong, but she wouldn't admit it for a long time. And when she finally was able to tell me I'm very sick, we were too afraid to go to an actual doctor, because anything that had the hallmark of authority or official status was something that we feared, because we didn't know who was mandated to report us. We had no idea. So we started trying to go to what we called basement doctors, people who had been doctors in their countries of origin, but were likewise undocumented here, and were trying to make spare money and change, kind of operating out of their homes. The idea being that there was mutual accountability. They couldn't report us and we couldn't report them. But of course, those doctors had no tools. They didn't have any of the scans that my mother would have needed, and were unable to determine what was wrong with her. And it finally got to a point where she was so sick that she was immobile in bed, rolling in pain, almost catatonic. And she told me to call 911. And that went against, of course, everything that I had been instructed to live with. But again, when you are a scared child and your mother, who knows all, tells you to do something that goes against everything she told you to do, I knew in that moment that something was very, very wrong, and I had to just do what she told me to do. But even after the paramedics arrived, I didn't know whether they were in fact paramedics. I couldn't tell. And I didn't know if she was going to get medical attention or whether they would be asking about her immigration status and then separate us, or deport all of us together, or deport some of us separately. I just had no idea. And luckily, the hospital was merciful. My mother was able to get the care that she needed. But I think that experience shows some of the behind the scenes, as it were, lives of the reality of being undocumented. And so many people have asked me, even before I owned the truth that I had once been undocumented, so why can't these people just figure out how to become legal? Why can't they just go talk to lawyers? Why can't they just understand the system? And it's like, well, there's a fear of even outing yourself that I think people from other marginalized identities and communities can relate to. And that secrecy and that forced and imposed secrecy pretty much limits your ability to communicate or understand the system, which already in and of itself is deeply complex and, quite frankly, impossible to understand. These days, I think all of our probably childhood scars and wounds continue to show up and manifest in different ways. And certainly fear and this need to dodge notice does act up within me. What I've learned is to be aware of that when it is happening, so that I am not automatically operating on this blueprint given to me in my childhood, and understanding, oh no, this is acting up because it recalls that time when you were 9 years old and you were hungry and you saw a truck giving out free food, but you were too afraid to be caught to get that free food. And that understanding that, and the mental health resources that I was privileged and lucky to get, and that's not available to everybody, has helped me move past it while embracing those early childhood experiences. And for everyone, I would wish that experience and opportunity to be able to accept your whole experience and be able to move forward as with integrity.
Yeah. Thank you so much for that. And, if it were as simple as like someone just making an appointment with me and filling out a form to like help them become a permanent resident or become a citizen, like I would have gone out of business, 13 million people ago. It's just, the immigration systems that we have, obviously, as you know, in the United States are really designed to ensure a white majority at the expense of everybody else. And I mean, that's been the way since, before the country even became a country, but especially so during the 19th century to the present. And we saw that just on steroids over the past 4 years. So you mentioned, something about carrying the secret And there's another quote that you shared later in the book, or that you write about, that secrets or I don't think it's actually from you. I think it's attributed to a judge who you worked for, about secrets having power. Can you talk a little bit about, what it's like to kind of carry this secret, and like the context in which, you actually decided to disclose to the judge about your past and what that meant, for your relationship, and kind of like your own catharsis or opportunity to deal with some of this past trauma?
I firmly believe that it is the things that we don't talk about, whether as individuals, as a family, as a nation, that have the biggest control and hold over how we operate. And after my parents and I became undocumented status, my parents said, let's just not talk about it. We'll pretend it never happened, and so we can move past it. I think that's a very common human reaction and instinct to something scary that happened, but it is very misguided because when you don't acknowledge a trauma or a wound, it goes untreated and it continues to fester and get worse with time. And that is very much what happened to me. The fact that I had been undocumented, that I had been hungry, that I had lied, I spent a lot of my childhood lying about who I was because I was undocumented, started to guide everything that I did. I mean, in law school, I found myself telling people that I grew up in Manhattan, well off. I would just take on these identities because there was a natural wall to any intimacy that I could build with anyone I met was impeded by this need to hide these specific years and my origin story in America. And when I was clerking on the Ninth Circuit, the Ninth Circuit sees a lot of immigration appeals, as you know, Ruby. And I was getting immigration appeal after immigration appeal, and this was during the Obama administration, where he was pushing forward DACA, but also ramping up deportations and removals as kind of almost a barter or trade in Congress. And I was getting so many cases where people were being removed to their home countries after having lived in America since age 2 or 3. And these people were not people who committed any sort of violent crimes. Often they were people who pled guilty on the advice of a public defender who didn't understand the immigration implications. And I had to make proposals to the Ninth Circuit and my judge on how to dispose of these appeals. Increasingly with each case, I felt like such a fraud because I was still maintaining the secret of who I had been and what my early years here were. And I kept thinking to myself, who am I to sit in judgment of these individuals who I'm not at all dissimilar from? And part of me being a new lawyer was like, am I conflicted out of these cases? I don't know how that works. And I was concerned that that would be a problem. So one day, really without thinking, I felt my legs carry me from my desk, go into my judge's chambers office, and plop myself down. She looks up, and I just spewed out everything that I had kept quiet for by then 20 some years. It was as if I was vomiting truth and I had been repressing it and suppressing it for too long, and it just had to come out. And I was terrified. As I was doing it, it was as if I had an out of body experience where I was looking down at myself and saying, what are you doing? This is the person who rules on removal orders. This is a federal judge. This is the person that you're not supposed to tell this to. This is the first person you're going to tell. Like, you're definitely going to lose your job. You're probably going to be sent back to Canada. Everything is gone. And when I stopped, finally, she paused to make sure I had said everything. And she said many things, but one of the first things she said was, secrets, they have so much power over us. don't they? And she said it so calmly, like she had been thinking that thought for years. And I didn't understand how she could have, because she hadn't heard my story. She had never been undocumented. She was a white federal judge. And it wouldn't take me until a year later, where I continued to think about that dynamic and conversation, when I realized, oh, she must have known, because we all have these secrets that we spend our lives guarding. And the very thing that we each believe make ourselves inherently unlovable, unacceptable, bad, illegal, that thought is actually what unites all of us as humans. We all have these deep-seated shames that we are on guard for at all times. And that is what impedes living honestly and living with integrity and living with true connection and community. And once I realized that, it gave me the liberation and safety to start exploring telling my story. And of course, my judge also said many other things that was important for me to hear from a judge, like, you are safe now. This is not going to hurt you. This does not conflict you out of your job. But it was that one powerful, universal human message that changed my view on life and my view on my own identity.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing that and being vulnerable about it. I do see there are some questions in the chat, and we'll get to those in a minute. And in your last response, you used this phrase. I mean, obviously, you're working with a judge, and you use the term, who am I to sit in judgment? And like, obviously, like, we're in the legal system, and there are certainly people to judge. But when I think of someone sitting in judgment, like, I think of Yom Kippur. I think of I think like that's like who am I, to be there, or to like at least make a decision in that context. So I want to transition and talk just a little bit about faith, and we'll see where this goes. So when I talk to my clients, and I think your judge did this too, I ask them what gives them strength, right? I think your judge you confiding in your judge, and your judge responding in that way that she did, gave you the strength, gave you the okay that it was fine to talk about this and explore this and really develop it. And when I talk to my clients about what gives them strength despite all of these challenges that they're experiencing, both themselves and their children, their extended families, more often than not they mention God. And I'm not going to ask you to talk about God, because that we'll be here for 3 hours, if to do that. But I know that young Chinjuli has superstitions, and that the narrator kind of has this like, I don't know what you'd call it, like an illusion of control, right? If I do it this way, then everything is going to be okay, right? If I don't step on the cracks in the sidewalk, then this will happen. And I think that's certainly a very appropriate way for, I think, a child to conceive how the world works. And, did that give you strength as a child to kind of believe in this way? And then really as an adult, where do you're obviously a very strong, brave, courageous, vulnerable person, being here, talking about your life in this way. Where do you get strength as an author and really as an advocate? Is that from faith? Is it from some other place? Where does that develop, and how has it grown?
I think humans have this inherent need to believe in something. I grew up without religious framework largely because in China, the government has succeeded in stamping out a lot of religious organizations. So I think I turned to superstition as a child because it was the only avenue available to me that I could conceive of, because I felt so out of control, as did my parents, of our life. And I needed to believe that there was some way to exert control. And I lived with that mindset for a very long time, and to this day struggle with it, right? It started to manifest later in life as perfectionism, as working 20 hours when 10 would have done, because I just needed to make sure that things would go perfectly and that I would have enough money to live. What the faith that my parents gave me and the strength that gave me in those years did not really come from superstition. The superstitious cracks thing never worked for me. So it just gave me a temporary sense of control, but later I would see, oh, that didn't work. My mother gave me the biggest gift of all during that time, and it was her telling me that I could do whatever I wanted. And she often turned to me for advice and with questions. And while child psychology may suggest that that overloads the child beyond her capabilities, it also gave me the sense that I had a sort of agency and a sort of power to trust my own instincts. And that really served me well until I was safe enough and open enough to find community. And once I did that, my judge being one, but also there were teachers. My third grade teacher saw me and gave me my first book, Charlotte's Web, and librarians who created a safe environment for me to explore. And later on, when I started to become more honest about who I was, friends and people in the Jewish world, I realized that it wasn't just me. It couldn't have been just me. I think we all need to believe that life has a way of showing up for us and serving us and guiding us in the right direction. And for most of us, probably that comes in the form of some sort of faith or religion. And before I had the framework to understand Judaism and that I had always in a way been Jewish, my mother gave me that faith, which was just in myself, that whatever you choose to do, it will be the right thing. And so short of anything else, I would wish for any child a strong and wise mother, because her voice replayed in my head in the moments when I needed faith the most.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing that. And, certainly as you talk about your parents and the hardships, the day-to-day hardships that they experience in working the jobs they did, having, despite being professionals in China, coming to the United States and having almost nothing besides, obviously the education and the spirit of growth that they wanted for you and for them. Can you maybe talk a little bit about how did they respond to you deciding to write about your story, and were they supportive of it, and have they read the book? How has that developed?
They were, in short, as supportive as humanly possible. I think it is probably every parent's worst nightmare to have their child grow up and write a childhood memoir, especially to the detail that I have written it. And it is particularly hard for Chinese parents, people who were raised in China, because there's this sense that we should not be airing things so personal. We should not be sharing our dirty laundry with the world. So it really terrified them. And added on top of that fear and stress was this thought, is ICE still going to come after us? When this book is out there, will they find a reason to denaturalize us? What are we going to have to deal with? And I think that was an easier fear, actually, for my parents to voice, because it was one that we had lived with for so long. But another fear and stressor that this book brought out is that my parents have been living with the guilt of my childhood pretty much for my entire life. And when I finally found the courage to tell my parents about the book deal, which was 6 months after it had happened, I was like, I have to tell them, they're going to find out soon. One of the first things my mother said was, "You want the whole world to know what an awful mother I was?" And that just broke my heart. Anyone who knows anything about my story or has read any part of my book would know that my mother is a hero. She really gave me everything when she had nothing for herself. And so every time I think about her living with that thought for so many decades, it hurts me that she saw societal problems problems inherent in our legal framework and the way our country runs and internalize it as her fault as a mother. But then I realized that that's very common for parents, that it in some way manifests in parental guilt for almost everybody. And if there was one thing I wish to give them, it would be forgiveness and amnesty through this book, this understanding of, I love you, I am grateful for everything you have given to me, and you did something beyond your human powers. So when I finally gave them the book on September 7th, I was terrified. They said they didn't know if they could read it because it was hard to revisit those years. But after they did end up reading it, and they texted me actually, and my parents said they felt healed with every single page. For the first time in so over 20 some years, they were looking back on those moments. And I hope they were able to see themselves with more forgiveness and grace. So when the book made the New York Times bestsellers list, I had to again tell my parents. And again, I was terrified because I also had the thought, man, ICE is definitely going to come now. And my father paused when he heard the news and said, good. There is nothing we are afraid of now. In that moment, I realized how long I had been living as a child looking to her parents for permission to feel safe. That at 34, I was still very much in that position. And finally, my father had given me permission.
That's incredible. I need to, let me just sit with that for a second. Yeah, I practice immigration law all the time. What I know about your immigration story doesn't strike me as anything that ICE would come back and try to denaturalize you. I know they're slowing down that program of denaturalization. But I will say that as an attorney who practices immigration law, your father gives you this advice throughout the book, again, to make you feel safe, of like, just tell someone that you're a US citizen. And that is, in the immigration context, like the death knell of all types of, for anything, right? If you make a false claim of citizenship, you are ineligible for citizenship, you're ineligible to get a green card, you're ineligible for almost everything. But that law changed in the late 90s. So, probably if you ever made that claim, you were, it was under, it was before the effective date. And also as a child, it doesn't have the same consequences. So without knowing any more, I think you're pretty safe in terms of kind of immigration law and denaturalization concerns. But, have them bring the fight. That fear and the strength that you now have and that your family has. I wouldn't want to contend with that. So,
well, I think it's interesting, right? Because it's a great point. I mean, as a lawyer, I know that it's highly unlikely, near impossible for this to be an issue. And yet, as someone who has lived with this emotional baggage her whole life, it's very difficult to separate that overwhelming feeling of fear with the logic and reason and my legal experience. And so and that's why I am so grateful for all that you do, Ruby, for your clients and the work that you do, because I know how taxing it is and what an emotional toll it takes, especially during certain presidential administrations. And so thank you for all that you do for your clients, and even for your words of advice and consolation to me here now.
Yeah. I'm reminded of a phrase that we work with a lot of law students, and as attorneys, my light went off. We're kind of taught to think about like facts in the law and just apply the facts to the law. So there's this phrase that I have to find who said it first, but basically, lawyers orient to facts, not feelings. Which I think totally describes the law school experience and for the way that many of us approach the work that we do. But we only become effective advocates when we're able to bring in those feelings, bring in our client feelings, and actually approach our clients, as whole people, not just as like a set of facts. Yeah. And your memoir, your story, and the work that you're doing, really brings in that feeling component to the law. And I think that when you're able to do that so effectively, you are the best advocate that you absolutely can be. And that kind of gets to this next question that was brought in the chat. That asks, where did your wordsmithing and general gift for turn of phrase develop? Was that a part of your legal training, or did you study creative writing? It just, there's, you can turn to almost any page in here and pull out some poignant phrase that could guide you for a very long time. And also during our chat, I wrote down a bunch of things that I'm going to return back to. But how did that develop? Certainly this love of English, what I think is the love of English, and kind of your gift for gab.
I'm grateful and honored by this question. Definitely was not, I don't think, my legal training, although the ability to be on your feet in the courtroom helps, and practice in that environment definitely helped me. I often found and find still in writing briefs, oh, if I could render this like a poem or an elaborate metaphor, I would do so well with the judge. And of course, you can't really do that. And I realized very quickly in my legal career that I needed a separate creative outlet with words. I think I was an English major in college, but it probably has deeper roots than that. I mean, as I said, when I moved here, I lived and breathed books, and they became just part of me. And when you read early in life, it just becomes a habit and a lifelong passion. I have read Middlemarch by George Eliot probably 7 times. I'm reading it again. So there are books that get within me, and Victorian novels were really my thing. I was obsessed with them as a teenager, very nerdy. And it's funny because I always thought that I would write like a Victorian writer. But when I sent my book out, the common refrain coming back in publishing was, oh, this book is it's very spare, and it's very, it uses fewer words when it'll do, whereas that's the opposite of the Victorian tradition. So I don't really know where it came from. I can only say that I come from a family of dissident writers. My father is a gifted, magnificent storyteller. My father's also an immigration lawyer now. And the very opening of my book was me asking him what his earliest memories were, recording what he had to say in Chinese and translating it. So I think that something about storytelling is in my blood and in our bones. And I think probably humans have a need to tell stories and hear stories and share stories. And somehow I was able to tap into that during my years as an undocumented child, trying to find salvation and hope wherever I could. And it just happened to be those library books.
Great. Thank you. You mentioned translating and or transliterating your father's story. Throughout the book, you use pinyin, which is the transliteration of Chinese characters into English, in the same way that Hebrew is often is romanized and used and is transliterated, and so that people who can't read Hebrew text can understand that. I love throughout the book that about half of the time you actually translated what was written in pinyin, and the other times it went without any type of translation, but there was some context and clues, and like that really helped me as a reader understand, like kind of be able to be in your shoes, like not knowing what was going on, like not knowing what was being said, in the same way that you or your family may not have understood what was occurring in the United States at the same time, right? So this, like, I think I know what's going on, but then I really don't. Can you talk about like why you chose maybe not to translate everything that was transliterated? And
it was actually, I'm so glad to hear you say that. It was exactly that thought. I wanted to offer to readers the experience of what it was like to move to a country where you didn't speak the language at all, and slowly becoming immersed in that new language and developing fluency in that language and losing a little bit of your connection to your native tongue. So in the beginning of the book, it's more Pinyin Chinese to show that I was swimming in Mandarin Chinese. for all of my childhood until I got off the plane and slowly more Americanisms and idioms start to seep in. And I didn't translate all of the pinyin because first, well, I wanted to focus on the words that were important to a child. So the words like daren, adult, is a huge distinction in a child's world. And that is an important term, I think, for the readers to understand. But some of the other terms that get used and phrases that get used were not necessarily within my full maturity to understand at the time. And so a layer of that played into which phrases and words I translated. On top of that is that having been a lifelong reader, I know that readers can feel when I trust them, and it's important to honor that trust between author and reader. And I wanted to show that I trusted my audience to be able to understand enough of what was going on through the context, and almost like it was a mystery that they could solve, and a puzzle that they could piece together. So it was my hope that the pinyin in the beginning especially would not be confusing or too off-putting to those opening the book, but rather give them a sense of true immersion within the story.
Great. Thank you so much. And I think probably my final question, there's a question in the chat about advice to an aspiring immigrant. And someone, I mean, the chat asks about a South Asian professional, but I guess I want to make this a little more general. What advice or recommendations or to both undocumented immigrants and anybody who's facing the behemoth of systems and complexity and trauma that our immigration systems have in the United States, what general advice or would you give to people who are facing those types of challenges?
I think it can be very natural and easy for immigrants to try to go it alone. Often the immigrant mentality is I have to fend for myself because I can't trust anyone, especially if you're undocumented. I do think, and this has grown over time, thankfully, that there are communities and circles where it is safe to ask for help and look for help. Of course, finding those communities and finding the right ones can be a tricky task. But I would first and foremost tell immigrants navigating the behemoth now to know that there are people out there who want to help, like Ruby and his organization and other lawyers and immigrant advocates, and to slowly and carefully explore which avenues might be the best and most available to them. I see that this question also pertains to someone who has children here. And I just want parents to know, especially immigrant parents, to know that they are, by virtue of their love, by virtue of the fact that they have risked a lot and given up a lot to come to a land where they see more opportunity and more freedom for a brighter future for their children, that they are already doing plenty for their children. It can be so easy to feel like you're not giving your child enough, but you're living out courage, living out your love, your vision for their future will serve them for the rest of their lives. And as a child of immigrants and an immigrant, I cannot ever repay the sacrifices that my parents made, because for all of its flaws, America has offered me a brighter future than what I would have faced in China, having come from a line of dissidents. So thank you for everything that you are doing day in and day out for your children. And please just remember that you are doing a magnificent job.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much. This has been fantastic. And just as a little coda, nobody should be defined by their status. Status is a temporary thing, but the love and the care that you're able to provide to your family and your children and the community around you is that's what's important. So thank you for sharing that and speaking with me. I think we're going to have Linda come back on. And all right, go ahead, Linda.
Wow, what a powerful, poignant, meaningful program. Um, I am very moved by the discussion, by you sharing your story, um, Chinjuli. And there's just 2 points I just wanted to comment on. There are many, but I can't take too much time at the conclusion. But becoming a citizen, I think that's so powerful. The profound privilege and power that you felt being an American citizen. And lastly, writing the book and how you, I think, liberated yourself and your family from the secrets of the past. I think it's just beautiful. So just thank you both for this wonderful discussion. And thank you all at home for joining us. Our next event is The Last Mona Lisa by Jonathan Sadlofer this afternoon at 1:30. So remember to like this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel, and visit our website at culturalarts.jccdet.org/book fair to see our full schedule and ways to get involved. So thank you all, and wishing you all a good day. See you next time.